we're going to move into our program. And we've got a guest, Rob Zako, here to talk about Measure 20287. Is that correct? Without further ado,
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. I wear a lot of different hats in this community. I've been involved in local politics and state politics for about 20 years. The last time I was in this room, I believe I was talking to you about Vision Zero and saving lives in the wake of some bad traffic crashes in this neighborhood and elsewhere. Tonight, I'm just a volunteer. I'm just a citizen. I'm part of Citizens Responsible Oversight. And I'm here to talk about some choices we have on the auditor measures. I guess we've got 45 minutes on the agenda. I don't want to drone on at you for that whole time. So I thought, to sort of mix it up a bit, I'd start by asking you some questions, and then I'll make some remarks, and then you can ask me questions. Does that sound good? Okay, so it's necessary. I am going to talk about Measure 2287, but we've got two measures on the ballot, 2283 and 2287. Folks from 2283 gave a presentation, I guess, a couple months ago, and you heard from them, and I will sort of compare and contrast. But that measure calls for an elected city auditor, and because it's elected, I thought I would just talk about how much do elected officials make in this state. So, and there aren't, I'm not going to like really quiz you, but how much do we pay city councilors? Anybody know? Just roughly, here in this city. How much does City Councilor Emily Semple make? Or George Brown, who I see here? Well, George is previously. How much? $1,000. More than $1,000 per year. 16,000, exactly. And how much do we pay our mayor? The mayor gets 50% more. Our mayor gets $24,000. So if you do the math, I think it's probably fair to say the city councilor is doing about a half-time job, works about 1,000 hours a year, so they're making about $16 an hour, a little bit more than minimum wage. The mayor, and I think that Jim Torrey or Kitty Piercy or Lucy Vinnis would attest to this, basically are working a full-time job. If they get paid $24,000 a year, we're paying them $12 an hour. Okay, so $16,000, $24,000. How much do, looking across Oregon, how much do we pay our state legislators? Senators and representatives. Ballpark figure.
24,000.
Yes, 24,000, about the same as we pay our mayor. Let's go up the scale. If you happen to be the Senate President or the Speaker of the House, you get double that. They get $48,000. You can see that I'm sort of getting up here in scale. So let's keep going. What's next? Okay, this is a good one. So the state of Oregon doesn't have an auditor per se, but the closest person that we have to an auditor, the person who actually does audits for others, for state departments, is Secretary of State Dennis Richardson, a Republican. We elected him a couple years ago. How much does our state auditor, how much does our state Secretary of State make?
$150,000.
Oh, that's way, no, that would be like in New York or California. We don't pay that here in Oregon. Way down below that. How much? Well, a little bit more than that. The Secretary of State makes $77,000 a year, as does the state treasurer, who oversees all the money in the state, and the labor commissioner. We pay our attorney general a bit more, and the attorney general can't just be any schmo off the street. The attorney general has to actually be an attorney, have passed the Oregon bar, have credentials. We pay the attorney general $84,000. Pardon me, $82,000. And how much do we pay our governor in this state? How much?
100,000?
Pretty close, not quite 100,000. It's about 98 or 99,000. Our governor of the entire state makes that much. Okay. By the way, the Lane County Commissioners fall sort of in that range. Lane County Commissioners get paid $84,000. So let's keep going. There's some. Okay, this is a good one because this is really actually the comparable one. Portland has elected auditor. Okay, elected by the city of Portland, they audit, so it's probably the most comparable position to having elected auditor for the city of Eugene. How much does Portland's auditor make?
85?
Well, the prices are going up here. We're getting more expensive, so it's going to be at least 100,000. About there. It's about 117,000. They get inflation increases. The auditor in Portland makes exactly the same as city councilors there. They call them city commissioners. They all make 117,000. The mayor, by the way, we'll get to that. So then, if you look sort of statewide, there's some people who are actually paid more than that in the low 100,000s, and they're mostly judges. So circuit court judges, tax judges, appeals judges, Supreme Court judges are all making between like $135,000 and $150,000 a year.
Do they all get PERS?
I don't know about that. And I'm not qualified to answer about PERS. We're just talking about salaries now, fringe benefits. Yeah, that's right. The Lane County Sheriff falls in that ballpark also. The Lane County Sheriff makes about $135,000. But as far as I've been able to tell, the highest paid elected official in the state of Oregon is the Chief Justice of the Oregon Supreme Court, makes $150,572, about $150,000 a year. There may be others, but I haven't found them. Yes, sir.
Is there a city manager in Eugene?
Okay, we're talking elected right now. We'll get to a point in a moment, but we're talking elected people.
I wonder how much he makes.
I will tell you that in a moment. That's more. Okay, so Measure 2283 calls for an elected city auditor to be paid a salary, and when we get our voters' pamphlets in a few weeks, we'll have a number in there. Does anybody know what it says in the voters' pamphlet that amount will be?
160.
Not quite. 153, at least 153,000 in 2017. Now that was a trick question because the figure's wrong. We haven't even gotten our voters pamphlet yet, and that figure is already out of date. Do you know what the eWeb Board of Commissioners did last week?
Gave themselves a raise.
Not themselves, they're not paid anything. They gave their general manager a raise, and there was a headline in the Register Guard. What the Register Guard didn't report is that they also gave our elected Eugene City Auditor a $4,900 raise. Why is this? Because according to Measure 2283, the auditor in Eugene is paid the average of the eWeb general manager, which is making $280,000 now, the Eugene city manager, who's paid about $220,000 right now, and the Salem city manager is paid $221,000 right now. The average of those three, 70% of that, you do the math, and today, if we were to elect an auditor in Eugene, we would be paying that auditor in Eugene $170,000. $170,000, $20,000 more than, as far as we can tell, the highest paid elected official in the state of Oregon, which is the Supreme Court Justice. Okay, that was just a warm-up. Okay, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Well, doesn't that tell us that we're not paying our elected officials enough? I mean, if you look at how much our city councilors, it's embarrassing that we pay our city councilors so little and our mayor so little. So while I understand the point that you're making, all these elected officials aren't paid them, it could be that really what it is they're not being paid enough, and the city auditor, that is a fair wage for it.
I won't argue for or against that. Well, I will argue a little bit against that. 20 years ago, 18 years ago, I was on the Citizen Mayor and Council Compensation Committee. It was a volunteer committee for the city of Eugene, and at that time, and for like 100 years prior, the city of Eugene, like most cities in Oregon, paid our mayor and city councilors nothing. And there's concern that if we paid our elected officials nothing at all, only rich people, retired people, or people of self-interest could run for elected office. And so there was a move to figure out how much to pay them. It was actually Don Bischoff, who was a columnist for the Register Guard then, this is how he did it. I think the voters would pay city councilors $12,000 a year and the mayor $18,000 a year, adjusted each year for inflation. And that's how we came up with that. And so that passed with voters in 2000, 2001 by 51 to 49%. The reality is that when you ask voters if they want to pay elected officials more, Salem just did that. They were proposing to pay their city councilors $300 a month or something incredibly small, and the voters said no. We tend not to trust elected officials in Oregon. We think that, I'm not saying this is right, I'm saying in Oregon, we tend to say that being an elected official should be your civic duty. If you don't volunteer, you don't do it to get rich. That's in contrast to people who are hired, like the city manager. The city manager is paid much more, but the city manager is an at-will employee. If he does a terrible job or she does a terrible job, he could be out in the street tomorrow. An elected official is in there for 4 years. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm saying that in Oregon we have this sort of difference of we pay elected officials less, we pay appointed officials more. Okay, we'll come back to this, I'm sure. I'm going to say three things tonight. I'm going to say we need an auditor, and I'll talk a bit about that. I believe that an auditor needs to be independent, but not only independent, but let me get my list here. The auditor needs to have a formal mandate. The auditor needs to have unrestricted access to information. The auditor needs to have sufficient funding, has to have competent leadership, has to have objective staff, has to have competent staff, has to have stakeholder support, follow professional audit standards, and have an audit committee. And that list I just read to you is not my list. That list comes from this publication here called The Role of Auditing in Public Sector Governance from the Institute of Internal Auditors and published by the Association of Local Government Auditors. This is nationally what they're saying we are looking for an auditor. Independent and other things. Yes, sir?
I was listening, and before, why do people get paid so small compared to like other people? I mean, I know their jobs.
You mean, why do we pay City Councilor Emily Semple so little? You're going to have to ask the voters that. I don't know. I mean, it goes back to this. I mean, I agree that we should pay elected officials more. I think that we would get better talent if we did, but voters haven't agreed with that to date in Oregon. So, a lot of characteristics that we're looking for in an auditor. What I didn't mention is whether the auditor should be elected or appointed. And the reason for that is, if you go to the experts, this is the Association of Local Government Auditors, Model Legislation Guidelines for Local Government Auditors. They're basically, and they have like a charter amendment or something here. They basically say, here's how to do it. If you want an audit in your city, here's some guidelines. Let me just read a little bit out of this here. Blah, blah, blah.
So, Rob, are you speaking for 287? Is that your position?
Yes. Sorry, I haven't gotten to my punchline yet. Let me be clear.
I feel you're beating around the bush. You're coming out with all kinds of unrelated things. I would like to hear why you're for 287. Is it a money issue? Is it an election issue? Or what?
2283 is severely flawed. I can't support it. I support an auditor. I support an independent auditor. That auditor could be elected or appointed so long as it works. But Measure 2283 has flaws. Measure 2287 addresses many of those flaws. That's my position.
Okay, well, can you address those instead of beating around the bush, please? That's my personal opinion.
It's important to make the point because other people are saying this election about elected equals independent and appointed equals lapdog, and that's false. Okay, I'm going to authorities and they're saying that you can have an independent auditor who's either elected or appointed. There are different ways to do that. The real issue here is independent of whom? And the key thing here is when we talk about independence is that the auditor needs to be independent of the people being audited. In the city of Portland, who's being audited? In the city of Portland, those highly paid city commissioners who are paid $117,000 a year and work full-time are actually the heads of departments. In the city of Portland, it would be insane to have an appointed auditor who is appointed by the department heads who are being audited. That would not be independence. Here in the city of Eugene, though, we have lowly paid mayor and city council. They have no staff of their own. They don't run departments. Everything they do is a public meeting because of public meetings laws. We're the people who audit the mayor and city council. Why would we pay somebody $170,000 a year to tell us what the mayor and council are doing when we're watching the mayor and council ourselves? We're the auditors of that. So, when we talk about independence, what we talk about independence is the auditor here in Eugene needs to be independent of the city manager and staff. And Measure 2287 explicitly says the auditor, our auditor, an appointed independent performance auditor is independent of the city manager and staff.
And 283 does not say that.
2283 says you have an auditor who's independent of everyone. You have an auditor who's independent of the city manager and staff, an auditor who's independent of the mayor and city council, an auditor who's frankly independent of us, the voters, because Measure 2283 has no citizen review board. And if we go back to these guidelines here, and I want to quote, you're cutting into my speech here, and I'll allow that up to a point. This is from this same guide here about why an auditor is good, and they say the following. The audit committee's role. The audit committee can greatly strengthen the independence integrity, and effectiveness of public sector audit activities by providing independent oversight of the internal and external audit work plans and results, assessing audit resource needs, and mediating the auditor's relationship with the organization. Audit committees also ensure that audit results are aired and any recommended improvements or corrective actions are addressed or resolved. Measure 2283 has no provision for a citizen review board. They say, well, you could have one, but the auditor doesn't have to pay attention to it. Measure 2287 explicitly calls for a citizen review board. It's 7 people. 4 of those people have to come from 4 parts of the city. 1 person has to have qualifications in auditing or CPA or something like that. And those people are responsible for recommending the hiring of the auditor, of providing annual performance reviews of the auditor, of looking at audit plans and assisting the auditor and being independent and making sure that their recommendations are carried forward. Yes?
How is the citizen committee selected?
The same way that all citizen committees are selected in this town by the mayor and city council. And if you don't trust the mayor and city council, you have a remedy. You can elect other mayors and city councilors. Yes, sir?
And how much does that group get paid?
All of our boards and commissions in this city are volunteer positions. They get paid nothing. If you're a planning commissioner, if you're a budget committee member, if you're a human rights commissioner, if you're a sustainability commission member, Zach, how much do you get paid to be on the sustainability commission? Okay. Are you a shill of the people appointed you? Do you do what Mayor Vinnis or what Mike Clark tells you to do?
No, we give them trouble and try and get them to do stuff.
Do they listen to you? Be careful with that answer.
Somewhat, a little bit.
Sometimes.
We're listening to it, so we're getting some traction.
Rob, I'm just going to, unless you don't mind, I'm going to
Please.
suggest that we let Rob finish his presentation and then take questions, and that way we can kind of keep track of data.
We're not even 15 minutes into this. I was going to do like a few presentations. This gentleman here was getting a little bored with what I had to say. It's okay.
Well, go ahead. I mean, that's
So I'm almost done. I do want to take questions. So look, I'm in favor of an auditor. The first proposal, 2283, has flaws. It has serious flaws. They have flaws that I cannot vote for that particular proposal. I don't know why Eugene would pay $170,000 for an auditor. We'd be the laughingstock of the nation. Why would we not require an auditor to be a resident of the community, like we require a mayor, a city council, our city manager, department heads? Why no citizen oversight committee? Why a budget of $677,000 or more? The auditor would be required, under 2283, would be required to have roughly 5 staff, whether he or she actually thought that he needed them. And that's there are other differences there. Measure 2287 is based upon a recommendation of a citizens group about 16 years ago. 16 years ago, following up on the work that my committee did on mayor and council compensation, there was a lot of talk back then about our form of government and city manager form of government. Should we change that government? Jim Torrey was mayor at the time. He, at the recommendation of the City Club of Eugene, the League of Women Voters, and the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce, formed the Citizen Charter Review Committee. They reviewed the entire city charter. They made a dozen recommendations, a lot of them small, some major. The city council referred all of those recommendations to the voters. Most of them were approved back in 2002, with one exception. That committee unanimously recommended a performance auditor, an appointed performance auditor. We as a community have never had a chance to vote on a proposal that we citizens developed, or a committee of us, back 16 years ago. So when my group, Citizens for Sensible Oversight, was unhappy with 2283, some people said, well, we should have just worked against it. I couldn't do that in good faith because I think we need an auditor. Other people I'm working with think we need an auditor, but not any old auditor, an auditor that works. And so when we were looking to come up with an alternative to say, there are different ways to do this, we said, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's go back to that original citizens proposal. It was for appointed auditor with the Citizen Oversight Committee. And what we did is we fleshed that out a little bit. We frankly took some good ideas from 2283, thank you, and we present this to the City Council and said, give us a choice. We don't want to have one choice or nothing for an auditor. We want to be able to discuss pros and cons. I'm not saying that 2287 is the best auditor. It didn't go through as much of a public process as I would have liked. I would have liked the council to say, let's have an auditor, let's have a citizen committee, let's talk about it, let's have a public process. That's not where we are. But given the two choices on the ballot, 2287 is far superior because it's independent of the city manager, city staff. That auditor will be paid the average of what other auditors in Oregon are paid or more. There's a minimum budget of $250,000, which is enough to pay the auditor that salary and office supplies and support staff and some contracting work. There's a citizen charter review committee that actually has teeth, 7 people from all parts of the community representing all of us with somebody that's got expertise that has specific responsibilities to both oversee the auditor and to ensure that they're independent and that their recommendations are heard and carried forward. And there are other things. Let me stop there and we can have a discussion. And Tom, why don't you help moderate this?
Well, I think what I'm going to do, first of all, we don't have a huge crowd tonight, although I do know we have a few guests that aren't GWN members, and also I know there's some people who support 2283 here, so you might get some hard questions. Can I get a hand count how many people know they want to ask a question? Okay, so we have half an hour. I was thinking we'd kind of queue up and make sure Jefferson Westside neighbors got priority, but I don't think we're going to be ready for time. So what I'll just throw it
Open it up, that's fine.
And then
I can,
Rob can call on
I'm happy to take questions from our friends over here.
Well, let's just start with people raising hands, and I'll help you. I'll try to keep it
Okay.
queue here. So Joanne, I saw your hand first.
Well, my question is, what do you think about the Register Guard editorial? Was that yesterday, or was it today, or something?
Sunday.
So suggested vote no on both, that an auditor is needed, but both positions are lacking.
I was disappointed. I thought that they got it half right. I think that, frankly, they took a look at Measure 2283 and diagnosed that. I didn't get the sense that they actually gave 2287 a fair reading, which is too bad. So I was hoping that they would say no on 2283, yes on 2287, but the Register Guard's going to do what the Register Guard's going to do.
I noticed George had his hand up next.
George.
I'm a JWN member. This is from your website, Citizens for Sensible Oversight.
Yes.
One of the bullet points says, Measure 2283, that is for the elected auditor. Measure 2283 limits the auditor's role to criticizing Eugene's past decisions.
May I see that, please?
I'm wondering if you could point out which the section is in the ballot.
May I see that, George?
Yes, you may.
Sorry, that's not a fair statement.
I didn't create this document.
George, please. George. So we're a group of volunteers. None of us are paid. We're working together. I'm not going to say that everything they did. The gist of that, which I think is true, is if you look at Measure 2283, it's heavily focused on looking backwards. Not exclusively, but there's a lot of talk about waste, fraud, illegal activity, sort of doing this. It's looking to find wrongdoing in the past. And is the word performance, George, in 2283? If I looked for that, would I find the word performance in your ballot measure?
So you're saying this is inaccurate?
I'm saying it's not 100% accurate. I'm saying that the gist of that was to say that the slant of 2283 is to be looking backwards. And I'm asking you, what is your intent? So is the intent for 2283 to have a performance auditor?
It clearly states financial and performance auditor.
Okay. So,
Both.
So a performance auditor, and I'm going to go back here to my Bible here. The role of public sector auditing. Auditing is a cornerstone of good public sector governance. By providing unbiased, objective assessments of whether public resources are managed responsibly and effectively to achieve intended results, auditors help public sector organizations achieve accountability and integrity, improve operations, and instill confidence among citizens and stakeholders. The public sector's auditor's role supports government responsibilities of oversight, insight, and foresight. Oversight is sort of looking backwards. Insight is looking at where we are today. And foresight is anticipating problems before they occur. The opinion of Citizens for Sensible Oversight, and it's our opinion, George, is that as we read Measure 2283, it is too heavily aimed at looking backwards and finding fault, finding wrongdoing, finding waste, which probably exists, but will we continue to do that year after year for the next 5 years, 10 years, 50 years? Will we continue to pay $677,000 to keep saving money? After we save money, can we keep saving over again? Do we have the same problems keep occurring? We already have, in the city of Eugene, a financial audit function that receives national awards and recognition. What we need is a performance auditor to complement that to, yes, find waste, find fraud in the past, but more so, help improve the operations of the city to do better looking forward. And if you look at the way in which Measure 2283 is constructed, it's constructed as if it doesn't trust anybody in the city, doesn't trust the mayor or the city council to make changes. That's why it's so independent that you can't even touch them. So what is the theory of how you have somebody who's so independent that comes to you and says, I'm sorry, Mayor Vinnis, you've been doing all wrong, you should just listen to me, but you didn't even appoint me. That's an opinion, George. Voters will have a choice on the ballot of which one they like more.
You misunderstand the role of an auditor. The role of an auditor is not to criticize the mayor and council or the city manager, but to work cooperatively and collaboratively with the department heads and everybody the city does business with in terms of tax
and
financial and performance of things. It's not like the council.
So,
To criticize people like that.
why does the mayor and council have no authority over the auditor?
The auditor would not be independent.
Are the mayor and council being audited themselves?
No.
Then why not, since the mayor and council are the ones who actually make the decision, why take out of their hands? Apparently we're turning a debate here, but I can roll with that.
Well, I think just wrap up your
Yeah.
comment. We'll move to the
Okay.
next
It's a
question.
matter of independence, Rob.
Okay.
It's not independent of
The auditor has no authority to change policy in the city of Eugene. The only thing the auditor can do is make recommendations. For those recommendations to have any effect at all, you're going to have a mayor and council that trust the auditor enough to put some weight in them. If we've got problems with the mayor and council now, having somebody who's totally outside of them to maybe not look backwards and find fraud, to make suggestions from the sidelines, I don't think that that's going to have any positive effect. Mike Clark said, who's the only city councilor opposed to an auditor, he said, we don't need an auditor because we don't need more information. He said, the last thing the city council needs is more recommendations. We've got too much information. I paraphrase here. He said, the city council makes decisions based upon the gut. So we could spend $677,000 a year for somebody to provide better information, and a gutty council just does what they're going to do anyways, and the city manager is not required to follow the recommendations of the auditor. By having an auditor that is appointed by the mayor and council, has their trust, and works cooperatively, yes, we have a chance that the recommendations of that independent auditor will actually make a difference, and we're not wasting our money. Next.
Let's take another question.
Yes, sir.
What is an auditor?
There are different kinds of auditors. There are financial auditors, there are performance auditors. We're talking here about a performance auditor. And a performance auditor, do you do any sports?
It's not an organized sport, but I do karate.
You do karate? Okay. So maybe you've got a coach or teacher, karate coach or karate teacher, and you're doing your best you can to do karate. And an auditor is sort of like a coach. An auditor is going to sort of watch what you're doing and sort of say, some of your moves are pretty good, but some of your other moves, you're not doing that so well. And they might grade you. They might give you some marks and saying, you missed this move. They might give you some pointers, but ultimately they're trying to make you to be a better karate person. So an auditor is kind of both a judge and a coach, both sort of telling you what you're doing wrong, but helping you do it better. But an auditor doesn't do that for a karate player. An auditor does that, in this case, for an entire city. Does that make sense? Yes?
Okay, auditing the city is going to be a really challenging job. And the budget is like 200 million. How much is the budget? So we're auditing a huge amount.
If you include the airport and different special funds, apparently it's $677 million.
So it's a lot of operations. So this person's going to be so expert that they can actually give improvement suggestions to everybody in the whole operation. So this is going to be a really smart guy and a really good staff. So I think the success of the whole idea is going to depend on the selection of this person and their diligence and effort, you know. So when you compare the selection, the strength of the selection process for these two measures, and also how you expect that's going to work in year 5, year 10, is it still going to, are they going to be able to replace people and manage their effectiveness over the, so which measure is the strongest at selecting that auditor?
Okay, couple, I'll try to unpack that. I heard 2 questions in there, good questions. First of all, yeah, the city of Eugene does a lot of stuff. It would be unreasonable to expect one auditor or even a staff of an auditor with 4 or 5 other people or 10 people to know what all 1,200 city staff are doing, and every year audit all of them and make improvements on that. Typically, what an audit function does is they don't audit a performance audit function. Typically what they do is they don't look at every single thing the city does every year. They do risk assessment. And they say, here's an area we haven't looked at in a while. Here's where we spend a lot of money. Here's where we spend a lot of money over and over again. And if we're doing something wrong over and over again, there's a chance that we could save money. So for example, maybe we're paving roads. Maybe we're spending $5 million a year, year after year in paving roads. You know, if we could save, yeah, go ahead.
Which measure has the strongest selection?
I will get to that. Okay. The point is first that you sort of said, you know, auditing all of it. And I just want to make the point that the way that Lane County does it is their performance auditor, and it's a small office, is they pick a couple things a year. They spend about 6 months studying. I think they did mental health recently and came up, before that auditor left to travel the world, came up with a study of saying, here's how Lane County could do mental health better. Also did some work on public works and how they do road maintenance and stuff like that. So selection process. There are 2 ways to do this. You can have an election. You can open it to the entire country, as Measure 2283 does. Anybody in the country who has minimum qualifications can run for auditor. We may get some people from Eugene. We might get some people from Oregon. We might get some people from elsewhere in the country. And there's an election. And what we're going to see is people who are not stereotypically that charismatic. We're talking about CPAs and people like that. We're talking about people who spend time in offices that aren't that flashy, and you're going to have maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 10 candidates who are all auditors. And they've audited for a while, and some was from Louisiana and some from Albany, Oregon, stuff like that. And voters will have to decide between these of which one's like best. And I don't know, is it the one who has the prettiest face or the nicest name or gets local endorsements or has the biggest campaign? I'm not sure. Somehow that's done, but then you have an auditor for 4 years. That's Measure 2283. Under Measure 2287, you have a professional hiring process. You're hiring a staff person. They're going to be an independent performance auditor. Probably what the city council would decide to do is hire some sort of recruiting firm to put out advertisements to say, who in the United States is looking for an auditor position? Here's the city of Eugene, here's who we are. They'll get a bunch of resumes. They'll have the Citizen Review Committee review those, narrow it down and say, of the 40 applications, we think these 5 are really qualified, fit our community well. They'll do some interviews, and finally the mayor and council will do that. The Lane County Commissioners just went through that kind of process. They just hired a PhD, Creers, I think is his name, from University of Colorado. He's got a PhD, comes very well recommended, and they hired him for $85,000 a year, half of what Measure 2283 is proposing to pay. Let me say one more thing about that. You didn't ask. Independence. So there's a concern that once the mayor and council hires, under our proposal, under Measure 2287, once the mayor and council hires an auditor, Isn't that auditor going to be beholden to the mayor and council? Isn't that auditor going to be reluctant to bear bad news and say, Mayor Venice, you're actually part of the problem here, or whatever, that decision you made, I understand that, but you could have done this better. Under Measure 2287, the independence of the appointed auditors is protected in 3 ways. First, they can't be fired without a recommendation of the Citizen Oversight Committee, not the mayor and council, the Citizen Oversight Committee. Second, they can only be fired for cause. There's failure to objectively perform their jobs, not because the report they made was politically unappealing. And third, it has to be a supermajority of the city council. It has to be at least 6 out of 8 city councilors vote to do that. So once, under Measure 2287, mayor and council have appointed somebody, and you've gone through this sort of professional, the way that businesses hire somebody by having interviews and stuff like that. Once they're in, they have independence because they can't be fired just for any reason.
Other question? Okay. Barry, you'll be.
Hey, Rob. You seem to be arguing at cross purposes that we have an election system that ensures that we can remove councilors and the mayor, but then again, we don't want an election for the auditor because somehow that's going to be bad and who knows who will run, and honestly, a lot of positions on the city council are not contested. The people who kind of set this up were members of the city council. 15,000 approximately people in Eugene thought this was a good enough idea, and the reason that we signed that petition was that debacle probably for a lot of us for the city hall. And that we see a lot of problems, a lot of what we see is glad handing that's going on, and that we wanted to have a say in it. And really coming in, the optics on this are terrible. I feel for you, your optics are awful. In terms of, it looks like you're trolling the people who went ahead and did the work on this. You had 16 years where you could have been advocating for this. So I guess what I'm saying is that, how do you explain to the people who read this initiative and signed this initiative because this is what they wanted. They wanted to have the control. They wanted to have something that's outside the city government system because they see that city government system as problematic.
Ted's referring to 2283.
I understand. Thank you, Ted. And I feel your frustration. First of all, the people who signed the petition, what they're asking for was a chance to vote on Measure 2283. Measure 2283 is on the ballot. They have that. I'm not taking that right away from them. I don't say that Measure 2283 shouldn't be on the ballot. I think democracy is great. I'm glad it's there. I'm glad voters have a choice. But signing a petition is not the same thing as actually voting for it. We didn't have debates when you were signing a petition. We didn't have choices. There was a discussion of that. Most people, when they sign a petition, don't read the 5 pages of text there. So I'm not saying that. I mean, that's totally legitimate. That was totally a legitimate activity. But if you go to the city charter, what the city charter said, no, I take that back, not the city charter. If you go to the city code, what the city code controlling elections says is when there's a citizen initiative, as there was, the council has 4 things they can do. It says that they can support it, they can oppose it, they can refer an alternative, or they can do nothing. And that's what the code says. Those are the rules we play by. So, and I know that the chief petitioners knew the rules when they did that, and so the city council looked at it. In their opinion, they said they didn't think it was great. We offer an alternative. That's the democratic process too. There's no monopoly here that the first measure has a monopoly and we only get to hear that. We also went through the democratic process. We went to our elected representatives. We said, we're not happy with that. We'd like a choice. Here's an alternative. We went to public hearings. We did the work, and they said, we think that that's reasonable enough that voters should have a choice. I don't.
Let's take another question.
Yeah. I think the process sucks. I think the way we did it sucks. But I also think that the way that the chief petitioners of 2283, where I had no opportunity to weigh in on that. I've been a supporter for an auditor for 20 years since Gary Blackmore started coming to Ruth Demler's groups back when I was on the Chair Review Committee. I would have loved to help with that, but what came out of that, and I had no control over that, is so bad, I feel I have to oppose it, and I think that sucks. But democracy is an imperfect process.
All right, Barry.
Well, I don't want to get too hung up about how much someone is paid. paid, but I'm really confused, because when you have a budget, isn't a budget line, the auditor is going to be paid this much? And you're saying that whether it's an elected official or an appointed, there's a whole different salary range?
So there are two different numbers here that are relevant. Okay, first is the person himself or herself, the auditor, what's their salary? What Measure 2283 says is they have this complicated formula related to the city manager, Eugene in Salem, and the E-Web general manager. You do that math, and the answer comes out that individual gets a salary of at least $170,000 a year. It could be more, but it has to be at least $170,000 a year. Measure 2287, ours says that the city council decides how much to pay the auditor, as they do the police auditor right now, as they do the city manager right now, all people they appoint. And the only requirement is that the council has to pay that person, their salary, at least the average of what other government auditors in Oregon make.
Yeah, you said that at the beginning, so
Right.
thank you
Okay.
for repeating.
So the second number, though, the second number is the budget for the entire office. Okay, we're not talking about just one person doing this. We're talking about an office with a secretary, with some deputy auditors, with some stuff, with some consultants like that. Under Measure 2283, the whole budget for the office, which includes the auditor, his or her salary, his or her fringe benefits, that is at least $677,000 a year. It's roughly, ballpark figures, 5 police officers, 5 firefighters, something like that. Under our proposal, actually, the city council substitute their judgment for that, says a minimum of $250,000. It sets a floor to saying, this is real, you're going to have a budget, you're going to have an office there, but not necessarily 5 people in the office.
We have another question over here.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you didn't think the 287 is perfect. So I want to know what you think are the drawbacks of 2287.
Well, the first drawback, and going to, is it Ted back there? Yeah. We went through as public a process as we could in the time allotted, which wasn't much of a public process at all. Why didn't we do the work 2 years ago? Because we didn't exist as an organization, because this wasn't an issue, because I've got other things to do with my life I'm paid for. It was only after Measure 2283 came out that some citizens said, we can't support that, what are the alternatives? So we developed it over the holidays, over the winter holidays, a few of us. We presented to council at the first public forum. It became public, there are news stories about it. But there really hasn't been a good public hearing for that. Even if, and this is the point the Register Guard is making, even if we did a brilliant job and Measure 2287 is the greatest thing, the public hasn't had a chance to sort of digest that and absorb it. The public also hasn't had a chance to digest and absorb 2283. I, as a voter, have questions about why that contains certain policy choices that just seem wacky to me. A better way, in an ideal world, would be to do a reset and to start over and say, yes, Mayor and Council, we want to have an auditor. The community wants to talk about this. Let's figure out what makes sense for Eugene. I don't know if that would happen. Let me say one more thing. So it would be great to have preference voting of some sort. We don't have that right now. So here's how it'll work in the May election. There are 2 different ballot measures. You can vote yes or no on one of them. You can vote yes or no on the other one. Independently, as separate ballot measures, each one will either win or lose. They win if they get a majority of votes on that ballot measure. If they both fail, so be it. If one wins and one loses, so be it. But what happens if they both pass? What happens if both ballot measures get more than 50% of the vote? Okay. Eugene City Code actually addresses that. In City Code and in the ballot measure, it says, if both measures pass, then whichever one gets more yes votes is the one that takes effect, and the other one does not. Democracy's not. What's the distinction?
We have 5 minutes left. Okay, Connie. I think we have time for maybe 3 more questions.
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to mention that when we had our opportunity
Give Bonnie the.
to speak with the neighborhood, they didn't have a measure on the ballot. So we didn't have the opportunity to compare and contrast the 2 measures. So I just wanted to make sure that people understood that from our opinion, our measure has been grossly misrepresented this evening, and we certainly didn't have a chance at this neighborhood to be able to do the compare and contrast. So that's all I wanted to say. We have plenty of literature that's out there, and we're You can reach us through our website, and we'd be happy to talk to you if you want better clarification. Thank you.
Bonnie, I appreciate that, and I will go one further. I mean, Tom,
Let me just say one thing real
please.
quick before I hand it back. Bonnie's correct. There was not an alternative measure when they came, so she didn't have that benefit. You hadn't been invited at that point because we didn't know if there was going to be a new.
Right.
Anyway.
Exactly. That said, there is an opportunity to have a comparison of the two ones. Bonnie, I believe that you will be speaking opposite Joshua Scove at the Southeast Neighbors meeting this coming Thursday at 7 p.m. at the Good Samaritan on Hilliard, and most prominently at the City Club this Friday. And so while tonight has not been that opportunity, those opportunities will exist. There was another meeting tonight, I believe, Goodpasture Island Road, which was not a debate. But looking forward, other neighborhoods in the City Club and the Rotary are all having debates where both proponents of both measures are having an opportunity. So before we get our ballots and before we get our voters' pamphlets, there is that opportunity to have a more balanced and fair, different comparison of the two ballots, and we welcome that. And Bonnie, we appreciate that you're participating in that as well. Thank you.
Any other questions? We have about 2 minutes.
I was just going to say, April 22nd, Gina's going to have Rob and Bonnie at Good Samaritan. It'll start at 6 and maybe 6:30ish. They're going to start speaking, but we're going to do it as a discussion, questions. I think Southeast is doing a debate. You know, we just want people to get the information.
To clarify, Sheena is one of our neighborhood associations.
Right.
Southwest Hills, yeah.
It's Sheena and Friendly Area jointly. Right. And I believe the Downtown Rotary is having a debate on the 23rd, the 24th, Bonnie?
It's on our website. I know.
Yeah, it's in a couple weeks.
Just the dirty little secret is that a lot of us just don't trust the city manager. We've been bullshitted for a long time. So I think this is the underlying thing with this.
Let me speak personally to that. So my job as executive director, not my job on this ballot measure. My job that I'm actually paid for is executive director of Better Eugene Springfield Transportation. We're for safer transportation options. We're for better transportation options. We want people to have choices. But in order to get that, we need our local governments to do their jobs. A lot of what I do is putting up with the crap of city manager, general manager, staff who do stonewall. I feel the frustration daily in the work that I do. We've been working on Vision Zero, and we had to pull the city kicking and screaming to adopt, no. The city council was on board. They said, we want to save lives in our community. They did that. Took staff another year to convene a task force, and they have controlled that. We have not had a citizen process with that. It's been 6 months since the Vision Zero task force, of which I'm members convened. I feel the frustration. There's no question we need an audit in this community. We need to improve city government. The question is how best to do that and which proposal best fits our community. Thank you.
Do we have one more quick question? We got about 30 seconds here.
Maybe this question is premature, but the voters pamphlet, I'm wondering whether you know yet what will be in it. And my real question is, do you feel it will present the issues fairly so that we can get a good overview of both measures in voters pamphlet?
The short answer is yes. I mean, we know what's in it is it'll have ballot measure 2283. It'll have a summary of that. It will have the text of that. It will have the chief petitioner's arguments for. It will have an argument against and rebuttals, and then it'll have some arguments from other people for and against. And they'll have ballot measure 2287, same format. There's going to be objective information, what the measures actually are and say, and there are going to be a bunch of opinions or arguments for and against. And voters review that and make up their minds. There are going to be endorsements for both measures for or against. That's how democracy works. But what I would say is the city has been totally fair is that they haven't slanted of saying, we'll allow these arguments, not those. I mean, it's been a fair process that, for any point of view, has been welcome to be in the voters' pamphlet. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us tonight.
And I